Joining us now to break down everything you saw yesterday is former Assistant Special Watergate Prosecutor Nick Akerman and CNN Chief Law Enforcement and Intelligence Analyst John Miller. Thank you both for being here. Nick, I think you obviously have the historical perspective here, and I wonder what you thought of the final public hearing yesterday.
I thought it was an excellent summation of the evidence that they've come up with over the last year. They really dug into this deeply. They put together each of these schemes all with the same object in the end, which was to stop the lawful transfer of power. They showed through video clips, they showed through other testimony, basically proof that Donald Trump was behind each and every one of those schemes. This was not something that we saw with the Senate Select Committee in Watergate. I mean, that was really an investigation that started right from the get-go. They didn't really know what was there until they got testimony from witnesses. It was an investigation that unfolded in front of the public. But here, you had a committee that was unified in terms of what it was doing. There were not any obstructionists on this committee. They put it together very succinctly. They put it together in an organized way. And I think the public really knows what the proof is and what they have found over the course of time.
What about the Justice Department?
Well, I think the Justice Department, we don't really know because all of that is under the umbrella of grand jury secrecy. I think it's pretty clear, though, that the Justice Department has a lot of this evidence. I mean, they had it before, and even the committee in its summary report acknowledges as much, that a lot of this the Justice Department has learned either from them or through other sources. And don't forget, the committee didn't uncover everything. I mean, there's some big gaping holes that they did not answer. One, what was the connection between the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and the White House? I mean, we have some interesting tidbits that came up about Roger Stone, who was president at the time, Donald Trump's chief political ally. We have some interesting stuff about General Flynn, the former advisor to Donald Trump, who was present with the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. But we don't know what that connection is. The committee didn't dig into that. They didn't dig into what was going on at the War Room, at the Willard Hotel, in terms of what were all those miscreants and no-goodniks doing there.
So then what are they waiting for? So then that just won't be part of officially if he is charged? None of that you're saying?
Oh, of course it could be. Absolutely, okay. Because we don't know what the department knows. They've got Pat Cipollone's testimony now. I mean, the committee was going up against the wall of executive privilege, but they've broken that wall, and so that's going to be very significant testimony.
So you're saying that the American people, and we should not just rely on the information from yesterday on the recommendation. There are other things at the president that the DOJ will look at other than what the committee may have.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, John, let's look at this. Obstruction of an official proceeding, defrauding the U.S., the United States, making false statements, assisting or aiding in insurrection. Now, I am told, I'm not a legal expert here, that the one that is probably the most chargeable, if that's a thing, is obstructing an official proceeding, and then the defrauding of the United States because of the fake elector scheme. Is that correct?
So the crux of the case is that they were trying to make the counting of the vote and the certification in Congress not happen. That is purely obstructing, in its purest sense,
right,
an official proceeding. So that's a solid charge. But as Nick points out, they're looking for, in this case, to compare it to, an organized crime case, who's that Sammy Gravano, who is the person who is high enough in the food chain within the White House, who can connect what the planning in the White House was, what the contacts with people outside were, and what led to the storming of the Capitol. What's really interesting, and which got very little attention in this discussion, because we're all focused on who's going to lock up the president, is that going to happen, what kind of historic moment are we in the middle of, is the issue of the intelligence failure. The committee's report says they had the intel from the FBI, from DHS, from Secret Service, from Jack Donahue's intel team at the Capitol Police, and they all got most of it right. What was interesting is who's in the feedback loop of that intel. It was not just going to law enforcement, but it was also going to the White House. The missing link was none of that intel did or could have predicted that the sitting president of the United States was going to go out on the ellipse that day and tell them you know, you've got to fight like hell to save the country, followed by other speakers saying things like trial by combat. It's just very interesting that the White House wasn't feeding that intel back because, of course, they knew what the president was going to do. If
you're looking at this, and let's say you're in New York City, your expertise here, and a very similar thing happened at City Hall, what do you think the outcome would be? Do you think the people who were saying fight like hell and, you know, all of the things that you just mentioned, do you think there would be charges? How do you think that New York City would handle it on a local level?
Well, it requires the same connective tissue.
That's why I'm asking.
It would still have to go into a grand jury. Somebody would have to say this was the plan and this was who was behind it and that it was a legitimate conspiracy.
The reason I'm asking is because everyone says, well, you know, but not everyone. The president's supporters say it is unheard of. It would be unheard of to charge a sitting president, and they are just targeting the current, or at least the ex-president, Donald Trump, because he is who he is.
It certainly would be historic. But remember, we have history here, which is Donald Trump has been investigated 3 times, once before by a special counsel, my old boss at the FBI, Bob Mueller. The difference, one stark difference in these cases, was that the guidance from the Department of Justice at the time was that it is not legal to charge a sitting president of the United States with a...
It's not anymore.
He's not a sitting president. So the game is a little different on his side.
But I'm interested in what you said about the security failures, because when I was reading the executive summary yesterday, it talked about Tony Ornato, who was obviously at the center of what we heard from Cassidy Hutchinson when she testified. And it talked about how he came in and he said he couldn't recall things like what she said about the Secret Services incident. He talked about getting the intelligence that, of course, we now know that there were warnings about it, but not being sure what happened once it was passed on to Mark Meadows.
Not sure after he heard it, whether or not he told anybody.
Yeah.
And, you know, Tony Ornato is not just your deputy chief of staff. He's a former special agent of the Secret Service, the former head of the presidential detail. So that's not the kind of training you get to not remember things.
Final word here. What do you think happens? That's what everyone wants to know. What do you think is their charge?
I think Donald Trump is going to be indicted. He's going to be indicted in Georgia, and I think he's going to be indicted by the feds. I think they've got the evidence. We don't know exactly what a lot of these cooperating witnesses are saying. And I think that you've got someone like Mark Meadows, who's probably the weak link. And if you're looking for the one witness, the most likely to turn, I would vote him the most likely to turn as the guy who might put it all together.
All right.